whether you can meditate or whether you connect with God through nature or music or movement or what it's like, find the way that you connect with the divine and that you feel invited to connect with the divine. And that is your path.
Hello, and welcome back to Religion to Reality, the podcast about living an integrated life. I'm your host, Dave Plisky, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Father John Gribowich. This season is all about listening, and to do that, we have hosted so many guests from across the religious spectrum of the world, and we're starting to wrap it up. So there's only a few episodes left. In the last episode, we heard from Elizabeth Schrader-Polzer about Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of John and just different aspects of textual variations that have happened in the Bible. Kind of an outlier episode generally, but the season was full of just kind of speaking with people from different faith traditions. In this episode, we're going to hear from Kelly Deutsch about recognizing what God is doing as our spirituality matures. She's a great example of a Catholic who has blossomed from the Catholic container that she grew up in and is now kind of holding various traditions, in that beautiful kind of non-dual tension, if you will. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the concept of the second half of life, I think you'll pretty much get it over the course of the episode. But just in case, let me just say a couple words about it here. We're talking about, as our spirituality matures, we're often faced with some kind of spiritual dilemma where we have to make a choice. It's usually a difficult choice. And, we have a container that we have grown up in. It's kind of, let's call it our identity, right? And identity includes our faith or lack of faith, let's say. And in this kind of moment, and there may be multiple moments in the course of a person's life, but we're often faced with the decision to either to do something, and what that usually looks like is one of three things. The first option is to kind of batten down the hatches and say, okay, the thing that I've learned or the tradition I've grew up in or whatever that might be, the identity I've forged for myself, that's all there is. That is the truth, capital T, and I'm going down with the ship. The other extreme, the second option, would be to say, you know what, I don't believe in any of this stuff anymore. I'm throwing out the container. It's no good for me. It's not working for me anymore. It doesn't do anything for me anymore. And I've got to find something else that's going to help me to deal with what I'm dealing with. Cause it seems like this pot that I, let's say, call yourself a plant, this pot that I find myself in is just not helping anymore. And then the third option is some kind of balance between those two that I think is maybe the healthiest option. And what we mean when we talk about second half of life spirituality, where you don't ditch the container. If you're the plant, you're still in the same pot, but you're growing out of it somehow. You're blossoming from it, and that's kind of the healthiest version of the spirituality that we hope this podcast has been all about. Living this integrated life. Today we're joined by Kelly Deutsch. Kelly is a spiritual director, teacher, and founder of Spiritual Wanderlust, a platform devoted to contemplative formation and inner transformation. A former nun turned spiritual wilderness guide, she brings over 20 years of experience exploring the intersection of mysticism, psychology, and embodied spirituality. Kelly's path was shaped by a profound personal turning point when a period of severe illness left her bedridden for over a year, dismantling her former identity and inviting her into a deeper encounter with mystery, suffering, and healing. Through this experience, she found guidance in the mystics and began developing an approach to spirituality that is both deeply contemplative and grounded in real human experience. Her work integrates traditional contemplative practices with modern psychological frameworks, including trauma-informed care, embodiment, and neuroscience. She is particularly passionate about helping individuals reconnect with their inner world and experience spirituality as something lived, not just believed. Through courses, spiritual direction, and her podcast, Kelly supports seekers in cultivating wholeness, emotional awareness, and a deeper sense of connection to the divine. Known for her honest, engaging voice, she creates spaces where curiosity, longing, and transformation are welcomed as essential parts of the spiritual journey. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's really great to have you. Did we, in fact, cover all the bases in your bio?
I think that sounded great.
Okay, great, good. So how do you and John know each other? Let me just start there.
That's a great question.
Yeah,
I
maybe I
was,
should answer it more than you.
yeah, John, if you remember the first way that we got connected, because I went down a rabbit hole and was like, I think I know who this guy is, but how did you first, how did I
Well,
come on your radar?
it came more from me listening to your interview with Jesuitical from America Media,
Oh, okay.
and I was like, oh wow, this person is really speaking like my language, and I was like, clearly this is just a person I like to connect with. So I just kind of cold emailed you, and eventually got back, and then you met with my friend and colleague Kathy as well. We were just kind of talking about like what we want to be when we grow up. So that was kind of how it began. And then we realized we had other connections, primarily with the Center for Spiritual Imagination, Adam Bucko, who kind of oversees that. That's we had some mutual connections that way. Were there Catholic worker connections too, or no? Or is that not?
I had found, and I can't remember if Adam had told me about you or something, but I had basically like online stalked you 6 months prior, and so I had found your
Oh,
work with
wow.
Catholic Worker, and I was like,
Okay.
oh, and you're also connect. Oh, okay. And so when you emailed me, I was like, I know this name. How do I know this name? And so
It's so
lo and
funny.
behold, we
That's
Yeah.
got
cool.
It's
connected.
it's a small world. Those of us
Hmm.
in this kind of second half of life, Catholicism space, I'll just call it that, or
Yes.
something like that, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's how it began. So I'm sorry for taking over the answer, but there you go.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question that's really for Kelly. Uh, so nun turned spiritual wilderness guy. I got to hear your story. Could you give us, some of the highlights, or go as deep as you like. I'd love to hear
Yeah,
Sure,
your.
and start
sure.
as like early as you want to in your life
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
whatever makes sense for us.
Okay. Um, I'll start by saying, I have always had this very like audacious heart. Like I've always been very hungry and um, it's like I want the moon, I want everything. And so I think from a young age that expressed itself spiritually. And um, from age 14, I thought that I was going to be a nun. I was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. This is where I feel drawn. I want to share this love that I've encountered. And throughout high school, again, it was like I was so hungry to grow, but didn't know where to go. And I remember at age 17, someone taught me Ignatian meditation. And I was like, yes. I knew there was more to prayer than just like God bless grandma or like, praying the Our Father. So I started meditating an hour a day before my senior year in high school. And I continued to meditate at least an hour a day until my health fell apart with illness many years later. Um, so I thought I would, go to school, graduate, join a convent, and live happily ever after. But obviously, it didn't quite work out that way. Um, I ended up finding this religious community that was based in Italy, and its whole charism was spiritual formation, the interior life, spiritual direction, all of that, which I was like, yes, this is what I love. So went to Rome, was studying with, people from all over the world, got to, see so many different faces of the church, the various movements, like so many beautiful aspects of it. Um, and you also get to see a lot of the, you know, human side and imperfections in the underbelly, both in a very personal way, like when you're in religious life, you're like, oh, we are all very human, and just being that close to, the Vatican and seeing all of that over there. So that was, um, we can go more into that later if you would like. But I had this turning point when we were in the north of Italy. We would have kind of religious life has these chapter times, like kind of community meetings once a year. And we'd go up to northern Italy for these. And I remember feeling so off. And the sisters were like, oh, it's probably just the altitude. Except that, like, 2 weeks later, I was being flown home with the help of a wheelchair, like, never to return again. Like, just um, ended up spending the next 18 months, like, mostly bedridden, being shuttled from doctor to doctor, trying to figure out what in the world, was happening. And in the midst of all of that, of course, my insides were just coming undone. And while this looks a little different from the term deconstruction that I hear a lot of my like post-evangelical friends use, I I relate to that term because I think all of us who go through some sort of deconstruction or are shifted into that second half of life, as you were referring, John, um, often lose the three big things. You know, identity, you lose your sense of purpose, and you lose your community. And all of a sudden, just like the entire world is upside down. Who I thought I was, where I fit in the world, and where I fit within the Catholic Church. Like all of these things, I loved the interior life and I loved spiritual direction. And I realized as I, was eventually outside of the community, it's a very different thing to be a woman in the Catholic Church without the word sister in front of your name, especially if you want to be a spiritual director. I was like, oh, okay. What does that look like? And what does it look like when my Catholicism and the way I practice it and the way I experience it doesn't look like how my friends and family had come to expect? What does it mean when my identity that I had assumed of myself, which was, this like joyful, like person who loved to share like things that I had learned. And um, I've always had a very like quick head and a slow heart. I have like a deep moving heart and I've been sharp from a young age. And to have all of that like just taken away, like to not have the ability to not only participate in the regular life of like the church and the things that I like to do, but to walk and sometimes even talk or sometimes even smile, to be so weak that I couldn't do any of these things felt like such a big identity crisis. Like, what does this mean about who I am and what is my purpose here on this earth? So
Mm.
it was a very traumatic change for me. And um, I'll say to kind of condense some of the latter portions as I slowly convalesced and discovered that there was this whole subculture out here of people who were in similar spaces, like often had gone through some sort of crisis and were still like filled with longing and this like restlessness for divine intimacy. I was like, where are all these people? And so
Mm.
that to me was very exciting. And one of the ways that I explain the origin story of Spiritual Wanderlust as an organization, just discovering that there are all of us out here who are hungry for so much more, even if we don't always have words for it.
Hmm.
Yeah. And how did you get it off the ground, Spiritual Wanderlust? I mean, what was your
Yeah,
your way to do that? I mean,
good question. I mean, initially I um, published Spiritual Wanderlust as a book, which
mhm.
actually, I don't know if I've shared this publicly or not. It started as a lavoro scritto in Rome, which was like, kind of like a term paper that you do for a class, because in Italy, their theology, they take it very seriously. Like we are very rigorous academics. So when I told them, that I had an undergraduate degree in theology, they're like, "Oh, that's so cute. You have a pastoral degree from America. And you don't do real rigorous academics." So they didn't accept a lot of my credits. And I had to retake a lot of the undergraduate classes. And I had one American professor over there who was an Augustinian teaching patristics. And he was like, "Hey, I know you've already taken this. How about you just write me a big paper about whatever the heck you want?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I wrote
Wow,
this big
fun.
paper
It's a
on
dream.
Augustine and John of the Cross and like the themes of like longing and desire and that eros, the restlessness, the spiritual wanderlust. So anyway,
Hmm.
I discovered it was being used as for like a college Bible study in the US later. It's like, "Oh, can you give me some time to like rewrite this so that it can be a bit more, you know, set up for public consumption?" And so I, ended up spending the next 6 to 10 months rewriting that. And um, that became kind of the origins of what later would become Spiritual Wanderlust as an organization, recognizing that there was a resonance with those themes, with a longing, and yeah, started my initial programs and discovered it was something that people were hungry for. So continued in those veins. We started with a program called Spiritual Off-Roading, and then we've now do these year-long courses on various themes. Like our first one was the Women Mystic School, and did one a month, like a class on a different female mystic. Then we did a whole year on Celtic spirituality with lots of, I mean, fabulous world-class teachers. Spent 2 years on 20th century mystics, which was a lot of fun from like all spiritual traditions. Everybody from Thich Nhat Hanh to, Simone Weil and like Mother Maria Sklodowska and Howard
Mm.
Thurman, Thomas Merton, all sorts of fun people. So yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's amazing. Sign me
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. So wait, so this is an online platform? When you say
Mhm.
contemplative formation platform, what, like, so people are taking these courses, pre-recorded videos type of thing? Like how is this?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so we do offer these classes live, but then, once they've gone live, they're all available in a recorded way. So our past courses, yes, they're all available like on demand. People can sign up at any point. This year, we're doing a program called Night School, all about how to survive dark times and, find the gifts of the dark. So we have lots of fabulous teachers coming, everybody from like Ronald Rollheiser to Christine Wolters Paintner, James
Great.
Finley, cool
Wow.
people like that. So
Yeah.
it's a nice way to be able to have kind of a monthly mini retreat and a community of people who are in a similar space.
Nice.
How long has this been around now? Because because you're really tapped into like, the heavy hitters in this area, so to speak.
Yeah, I think our first program began in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
Yeah,
great. That's so
yeah,
great. And who's showing up? Like what would be the demographic of people who are taking the online
great
courses and
question. Um, It's by and large, I compared notes with some folks at the CAC about this, the Center for Action and Contemplation, where Richard Rohr is, and they're like, yep, we have pretty much the same demographic. Like people who actually come to programs are the vast majority are retired women.
Hmm.
But then we also have, a handful of folks who are, younger, some, you know, men, some older. Um, a lot of folks um, who have complex relationships to Christianity. Some of them are non-Christian. We have folks of other religions, but a lot of them either some of them are still church going and um, just are like, we have thoughts, and others have left the church altogether, but still are very much in love with Jesus and are very much on this pursuit of, the contemplative life of union of whatever words they would use to describe it. Um, but I find a lot of folks are often ones who have been doing their inner work for a long time, whether they've been,
Mhm.
meditating for decades or they're clergy or spiritual directors, or I find a lot of helping professions, honestly, therapists, teachers, medical professionals, etc., people who are already dedicated to something related.
I imagine that there's a fair amount of discussion time and community building time between people who are journeying together. And it's not just hearing the lectures and that. Is there are there anything is there anything that you do to kind of to hold the I don't want to say that there's tension. I'm not trying to project anything, but get just understanding that people are coming from very different places in their spiritual journeys and their religious observances and practices. Is there anything that you do to sort of cultivate a togetherness or community just knowing that people are coming from different places?
Good question. I'll say yes and no. In the sense that, so like our courses have, small groups and different things where people can have live conversations with one another. And we definitely try to hold a very sacred container there and say, like, this is going to be different than just a normal conversation that you might have in a, book club or something, because we want to be able to bow to and reverence the sharings of one another, the experiences of one another, even if they come from different places, So we ask a pause, a sacred silence as almost a member of the group as people share. So I would say that's one way, but people have definitely been clamoring for more community time, more connection. And I think I tend to distill the hungers of folks in these circles down to two, of one being community and the other for depth. Like, give me something like I can sink my teeth into, but also so many people feel so isolated and alone because they don't know other people who, share this kind of language or spiritual space. Um, so we definitely have a lot of hunger for that and plans to create more space for small groups and conversations and creating relationships.
That's great. It's so easy when you're planning a retreat to want to fill the day, and I mean, this is maybe true of even business meetings and stuff like that. But you want to feel like you're not wasting people's time, and so you try to pack it, and people are just like, actually, I want more time to myself or with others. I want to reflect. I want to converse. And that's me. That it does like you feel guilty as a planner. You're like, oh, there's nothing to that. Like that's just, but that's sometimes the most meaningful stuff for people when they
It's
get to.
true. I think Thomas Keating said the same. He's like, the best part of retreats are like meal times and break times.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. I will say that my involvement with the Center for Spiritual Imagination, like we do all our online work, so to speak. But when we gather for retreat, the schedule is super light
Hmm.
and it's like the best. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's the most ideal way to do it. And it works out great. I want to go back to something that you said as part of your story, and I want to touch on it before we kind of go too far. But you said that you start meditating when you were in high school for an hour a day. So
Hmm.
now that's interesting to me because first off, I teach high school students. I'm very passionate about understanding where they are spiritually. But how did you do that exactly as a high school student? Did you build up to that? I mean, did you have some type of guidance? Like, what were you, and what were you just, what did that meditation look like for you?
Yeah, so it was Ignatian meditation, so very imaginative, like place yourself in a scene. And I was like so hungry. I was like, I know there's more to this. Like, I read The Interior Castle of Teresa of Avila when I was like 16, and I'm sure I was missing things, obviously, but I was like, just give me like something real. So I jumped right in, to like, let's just start doing this like every day.
Hmm.
Um, I had been asking for so long for, just priests, whoever I could connect with for a spiritual director. I'm like, how do I find a spiritual director? And still hadn't found one, but had connected with some college students, like a Newman Center. And it was a college student who was like, hey, our priest taught us Ignatian meditation. It's really cool. Here's how you do it. And you place yourself in a scene with Jesus in the gospel. Or sometimes you can just place yourself in any scene and see, like, allow your imagination to unfold and see where the divine is leading you. So, yeah, because of the way our schedule was my senior year, for most of the year, didn't start class until 10 a.m. So I'd go to daily mass and pray for an hour afterwards and head to school after that and use the kind of was that Francis de Sales who talked about the like carrying the nosegay with you throughout the day? Like bring a little, like if you are going throughout the, nice gardens in the morning, bring a little bouquet with you to carry throughout the day, and
Hmm.
which is a nosegay, a nice old word for that.
Hmm. I was gonna
And
say, what,
so,
what, what was that? I don't remember
I know,
Sayers
what in the
talking about
world?
that, but I mean,
Like,
like,
bring a
it's not
little bouquet
interesting.
of flowers with you to like, remember what you
Yeah,
encountered that
That
morning.
sounds
And so
very
my
Salesian.
18-year-old version of that was using like a Bic pen to like write my daily resolution on my arm. So I'd
that's
like
cool. That's
remember in
cool.
calc class, like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to, okay, be present. I'm gonna be present today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I know the other thing I want to kind of touch on too, because we've been throwing it around a lot. This whole idea of second half of life or second half of life spirituality or something like that. I mean, what does that mean to you? I mean, something I'm very, I guess you would say, passionate about. I like kind of exploring it with people. I mean, what does that mean when you hear it? And maybe what is your personal experience of it?
Sure. Yes. Um, So this language was very helpful for me. And I mean, various writers have written about it, Carl Jung, Richard Rohr, etc. Um, and when I encountered it, maybe re-encountered it during my time of illness, being bedridden, it like so resonated with me because The way that they often describe it is, the first half of life and the second half of life generally have nothing to do with like age or chronology. Like you can have a
Hmm.
teenager in the second half of life and you can have a 90-year-old in the first half of life.
Hmm.
But generally, what it is the first half of life, we spend a lot of time building our identity, especially our identity as understood as the ego, right? Here's who I am, here's who I'm not. Like for me, it was like, I'm Catholic, I'm not Protestant, I'm white, I'm not black, I'm straight, I'm not gay. Like, here's who I am, here's who I'm not. And I'm probably gonna, at least personally, have a little bit of judgment towards those who maybe aren't the right kind of Christian or the right kind of Catholic or, whatever, because obviously I have found the correct path.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Speaking for myself.
Ringing very
Uh,
true. Yep.
yeah, and um, usually, in Rohr's terms, through a great love or great suffering, I'm like, I don't know anybody who's gone the great love route, but usually through great suffering, we are drop kicked into the second half of life.
It's hard to talk about it if you go the great love route, right? I just started loving so hard that I couldn't help but be super mature in my spirituality all of a sudden.
I just, or maybe you were loved so profoundly, that it was just, and there's definitely some of that. Like, I was bowled over by, the tenderness of God at times. And it really took being like ripped from my identity, community, purpose, etc., to realize how much I had been clinging to those things for a sense of security and certainty. I think those are the two big hallmarks of the first half of life is really grasping after certainty and security. And in the second half of life, there's an openness to mystery. And it definitely doesn't all happen at once. It's not like a light switch flips on. You're like, oh, great. No, I'm suddenly like totally fine with unknowing and paradox and
Right.
all of those things. But I think it gradually comes along. And the analogy I would sometimes use at Spiritual Wanderlust, especially for our spiritual off-roading program, is how a lot of us are born in the equivalent of like religious suburbia, where you have like an HOA that has approved color palettes and exactly like, where the fences are, what the rules are, what's approved and not approved. And then through some crazy event, you are plopped in the middle of the Yukon territory, which is outrageously beautiful, just mind-blowingly gorgeous, and terrifying because how in the world do you live out there? It's so different from this like very prescriptive place that you grew up in. And so while there's excitement, there's also a little fear. And, I suppose that's where the tremendum comes in, that sense of awe that is also a little bit terrifying. And so, my hope for Spiritual Wanderlust, for example, is not necessarily to, take people down the various trails in this spiritual wilderness. I'm like, there are trails. If you want to go hang out, there's the Carmelite trail, there's the Benedictine trail, there's the Salesian trail, there's also like the Buddhist trail, there's the Hindu trail. Like, there's so many traditions and ways that people have found to navigate this wilderness. What my hope is really to help people find the tools that they need to navigate it. Like, how do we read our inner compass? How do we
Hmm.
chart our way by the stars? How do you pitch a tent? How do you survive? Like, what's your survival kit for this time so that you can explore whatever trails or off-roading you would like to do in this space? So, to me, that is a very kind of visceral image of what the second half of life is like, is that space of spiritual wilderness and being able to appreciate the mystery and the unknowing that comes with all of that.
You're really good.
Yeah, that's a really great way of describing it. I will be stealing a lot of that too. So I'll try to give you royalties, at least credit. The
0% of
thing,
zero is zero.
the thing, maybe like a practical question just for you is like you talked about, when you were in high school, you're meditating a day for an hour a day, and now you are where you are now. Um, What's different? How's the Catholicism that you practice now different than the Catholicism that you practiced when, let's say, you're in high school or even when you were in the convent? Like,
Mhm.
what looks different?
Good question. Um, Nothing and everything.
Hmm.
Um, so I will say that to some of my friends and family from, growing up in other chapters of my life, I think they probably find my form of Catholicism completely baffling.
Hmm.
And but I also feel more Catholic than I've ever been. I just am like dwelling at its mystical heart, which in my opinion is the best kept secret of Christianity, that there even is a mystical tradition within
Hmm.
Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, so that to me is like the entire point of Christianity. And I think Eastern Christianity often does a better job of at least articulating this. Perhaps it's more prominent in their theology that, like, hey, the whole point is theosis, i.e., divine union. How do we get there? Kenosis, self-emptying. Like,
Hmm.
this is the whole goal. And I think it can be easy, especially either side of the spectrum in Western Christianity or Catholicism in particular, whether you're someone in the pews or somebody who's, had advanced theological studies, it can be too easy to get stuck in our heads about things,
Totally.
um, rather than embracing the kind of wildness of mysticism, of the divine, of mystery that is, Aslan is no tame lion. Like,
Hmm.
this is
Hmm.
not, I think we can use our concepts and our even our practices to actually insulate us from the wildness of God instead of encountering that raw mystery. So I would say my Catholicism is different in that it feels much wilder at times. My prayer is very different. That's also just due to my chronic illness, this dynamic disability that I have. I can't meditate for an hour a day, and having to let go of those ideas of what I thought holiness was going to look like for my life, or just holiness in general. I think a lot of us, it's easy to assume that holiness looks like something very monkish, like we're supposed to be
Hmm.
lost in contemplation, rather than, what all of the saints and the tradition tells us is like holiness is doing the will of God. Punto, basta, as the Italians say. Like, that's
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, that's it.
Um, so whether you can meditate or whether you connect with God through nature or music or movement or what, it's like find the way that you connect with the divine and that you feel invited to connect with the divine. And that is your path. Your path is your daily life. It's saying yes to what you're being given. I could go off on that for a while, but I'll say
Yeah.
that's
Well, I
mainly
mean,
my my
let's just go keep riding this wave for a little bit because I mean, like, I have also had come to realize that the prescriptions of what is deemed to be holiness or what is deemed to be a sure, right path to be having a relationship with God, like that stuff kind of sometimes is not really where I'm at. I mean, like and as Catholics, it's pretty well ordered and prescriptive. I mean, how many times do we hear it? Like Eucharist, confession, rosary, adoration. It's like the magical formula. Like if you're doing those things, you're set. Like you should not even doubt that you need anything else. I mean, and if you deviate from those things, then somehow you might be doing something that's taking you away from God or like having you kind of live more for yourself than for God. And that's the narrative. And honestly, I've had to wrestle with that because, I think I was just watching a retreat video the other day, like a trailer for something, and I was like, it was so super this, and it was for priests. Like, we're gonna have mass and we're gonna have adoration and we're gonna be praying the rosary and there's an opportunity for confession. And I'm like sitting there thinking like, this is just completely not what I'm interested in doing at all. And it's like you're like thinking to yourself, am I even Catholic at this point? I mean, like, why would I not be also rah rah about all those things? But,
Mm.
to me, like the ordering of those things is completely different now. It's like, uh, yes to all those things. I'm not like rejecting anything. It's just that like they have a different place in allowing me to experience. Um, the fullness of God. And I don't like really think that the fullness of God can ever be contained even by something like the Eucharist or by sacramental encounters. So, saying that kind of stuff, you're like, what's up with this priest, right? I mean, so like, how does that like land with you, or if anything, with other people you talk to who may be feeling something similar to that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's probably very true for a lot of folks where they're like, I'm not feeling fed just by these things, even though I'm being told that this is like where the feast is. And, it feels blasphemous to say such things like, oh my goodness, like that the Eucharist isn't everything. Like I used to, I mean, goodness, I remember writing in high school, at the end of high school, my freshman English teacher was like, Kelly, I don't know if you remember this, but when you were a freshman, we had one of those like surprise writing prompts, where you had to spend 40 minutes like writing about something that was important to you. You wrote an entire essay on the Eucharist in the middle of a public high school. I was like, oh, did I? I was
Wow.
obsessed.
Yeah.
But like Teresa of Avila will even tell you to not make an idol of the Eucharist. Like,
Hmm.
what does that even mean? But when
Hmm.
you recognize that God can come to us in such a wide myriad of ways, who are we to limit God to these very specific boxes, even if those can be very powerful for people? Like, there is a whole movement of non-Catholics and even like, pagans, like non-religious people who are praying the rosary online, like
Hmm.
thousands of them. Meanwhile, for a lot of Catholics, it's something that's become so rote that it almost becomes like meaningless, or that the meditation isn't actually happening. The transformation that is supposed to happen in prayer, it might not be happening. And that's when I think we really need to listen to those subtle tugs, because practices are not the point. Like you don't just like play scales on the piano to play scales on the piano. It's so that you have the freedom to like play gorgeous masterpieces if you so choose. And I
Yeah.
think to me, the image that makes most sense to me is like the practice is always the scaffolding. Like the whole point is to be able to turn inward into those like subtle tugs, or on the scaffolding, maybe it's the wind blowing by. Like, can you catch the breeze? And whether that's for 10 seconds, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, you're supposed to catch the ruach, the like spirit, the breath that is blowing by. And if that happens through Lectio Divina, if that happens through a walk in nature, if that happens through your yoga class, awesome. Or you might be just in a conversation with someone. Wherever those tugs happen into presence and stillness, the invitation is to stop and to stay for as long as that breeze takes you. And then you return to whatever your practice is. And so it's, it's putting I don't know, putting the horse before the cart, perhaps. Like when we obsess almost or fixate on the practice rather than the goal of the practice.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of explaining it. Um, yeah, Dave, I'll let you go because I know I've been asking a lot.
No, it's good. Yeah, the way you described first and second half of life reminded me of the way Lonergan talks about how there's kind of two types of people, right? There are those who need certainty and those who seek understanding.
Mm.
And I've been studying theology as a in a master program for three years now. I'm taking my sweet time with it, and I can't help but feel like I'm studying it too late in my spiritual development, because I started after I was already convinced that it's not about certainty, and that's of course what you learn in a quote good theology program. And I'm not trying to say that my program isn't good; it is good, but it's good in a certain way, which is that we need to toe the Catholic line and all that kind of stuff, right? Uh, John, I remember you giving me feedback when I was considering, which course to do. You said, find one that is relatively traditional, so that you learn kind of like what everybody learns, and then you can kind of branch out from there. But at least you're getting the foundation. But I just feel like the foundation it's probably something better to learn while you're still filling up your identity container,
Mm.
rather than and feeling like you need the certainty. Because for me, like Catholicism and just religion in general, like started in my head for sure. It took a long time to move to my heart.
Mhm.
But now,
Yeah,
so Kelly,
that's a good point, Dave. Actually, I was thinking because like when I was studying theology, I was like, oh, like yeah, rah rah Catholic. This is amazing. All this great stuff.
right,
It's like,
right,
yeah, I think that's kind of cooled down a bit. So I mean, like, but
yeah.
yeah, I can see what you're saying. Yeah.
So some of the question that I have, I guess, is like, what do we do? What does someone like us do? Obviously you've created spiritual wanderlust for people who have that seeking heart, and are maybe looking for, affirmation, edification, and maybe even community of solidarity with people who are like-minded or like-hearted, let's say.
Mm.
Um, um, but I think that, one of the hard lessons I've had to learn about community is how we're not meant to um, craft ourselves into a perfect sort of community where everything is exactly how we would pick it. Like part of the whole point of journeying with other people in community is specifically so that we can be encountering what maybe doesn't feel so perfect to us, or what have you. And so I feel like I have to, there, on one hand, I'm tempted to to go deeper into community with who I feel like will be like-minded people to me. And on the other hand, I feel like they're like I it's probably more um spiritually building for me to be staying in community with people that are not like-minded to me.
Mm.
How do you navigate that?
That's a good question. And I think you're putting your finger on something there because it feels like both of those are very important because having people who are like-minded can feel like such a relief. Like you finally feel seen and heard and understood, and that you can see and hear and understand another. And it can be very edifying. Excuse me. To be able to have people who speak the same language. I mean, I remember someone in one of our small groups last year who, was probably late 70s, and she's like, finally, other spiritual weirdos like me,
Mm-hmm.
and was just so excited
Feels
to
good.
have a similar
Yeah.
language that is shared, especially when you feel so isolated or often misunderstood where you are spiritually. It is a huge relief to have others who are in a similar place and can really help you grow. But they're different kinds of growth, right? With people who are speaking your language and can maybe call you on some of the nuances of like, hey, are you noticing this blind spot? And maybe we all need to really focus on, XYZ. But it is critically important to have people who are different from you. Otherwise, we end up in these echo chambers. And I think just of, my time in religious life, like, you don't choose like who is in the community, whether they were sisters who joined prior or later after you. And you can have such a difference of cultures and opinions and just backgrounds, assumptions about how life should work, or simple things like how chores should be done. All of the very various points of difference that can occur. But I think especially now when the world is so polarized, finding ways to dialogue with people who are different requires such a posture of curiosity and openness, grounding in some sense of presence and positive regard for the other person, and not assuming that, they're out to get you, or maybe even malintent. That's challenging, but that's where so much of the growth happens. And I think it's very easy to assume that we're growing spiritually if we're like, man, I prayed in silence for an hour in adoration. Like, wow, I must be growing so much spiritually. But then, like, not have a single person in your life who like challenges you on anything, who's like different from the way that you think. It the psycho-emotional maturity has to come alongside the spiritual maturity, or like they rise together basically.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to think that we're being nice by not ruffling any feathers or talking about difficult things. but niceness isn't the virtue. Kindness is. Charity isn't always a fluffy, uh, heartwarming kind of thing. It can be a fearful thing. It can be intimidating when it requires having difficult conversations that I don't think a lot of our parish communities necessarily prepare us for, because the church is a very large ship and she takes a long time to turn. And the fact that psychology has only been around for 1,000 years, 100 years, I
Mm.
think the church is still slowly catching up on what that means and how to incorporate lessons from that more explicitly into our formation.
And you can be as involved or uninvolved as you want to in the parish. I mean, I know
Mhm.
someone who went to a parish for 5 years and never met a single person because
Mhm.
she didn't want to. And in the Catholic Church, for better or for worse, that's very available. To people.
Mm.
I've been to. I've been to like a Lutheran service where like the first time I'm getting like many hellos and welcomes and so forth. People that know that you're not normally here. And that's, maybe that's part of the fact that most Catholic churches in the U.S. have multiple mass times, and so you could actually conceivably usually go to a different mass, and so we didn't can't assume that you're not from our community. Whatever, there's all that kind of stuff, and plus we're bad at welcoming people and all kinds of things.
There's
But
that, I guess.
I don't even know what I'm babbling about. But yeah, all that you're saying is very resonant with me.
So there's a certain type of demographic I've been um, unexpectedly working with recently, and that's been young mothers and even mothers of like older children. But like they have come to a point where most of them were very much reared in strong, let's say, a very strong Catholic container, and having children has kind of exposed them to a different way of having to try to wrestle with their Catholicism in light of their children who may have different ideas of just how to live life,
Mm.
and also just the challenges, especially of younger mothers, of just dealing with um, all of the demands that are pulled upon you, that are placed upon you as a young mother. And it's like I don't have time to like even go to church on Sunday sometimes because I'm just exhausted,
Mm.
and feeling the guilt of that, and then also kind of feeling the guilt that an older mother has because I thought my children had become Catholic and now they're like atheists or whatever, I mean, and I kind of look at that as being like maybe that's even an opportunity to kind of move into second half of life, like that the type of pain that's experienced and feeling that you've kind of failed at motherhood or something like that,
Mhm.
because of the preconceived notions and prescriptions that you've been kind of taught or kind of given as the ideal from some type of, let's say, traditional Catholic perspective. Let's put it that way. I mean, have you come across anything like that? And or if anything, what would you say to someone in those situations? Because, let's just take it from this vantage point. Like, mothers are seems to have these souls, their children entrusted to them, and they feel like responsible for these souls.
Mhm.
And it's a hard thing to kind of realize that your Catholicism isn't necessarily kind of maybe providing the blueprint that you thought it would
Mm.
for a well-ordered life with your children. I
Yeah.
don't know if that speaks to you or if you've come across that anyway. Or
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really stands out from what you shared is just the word guilt. I'm like, that to me feels like such an interesting indicator to examine whenever we feel riddled with guilt and shame about not living up to a certain standard. To me, that is a very big invitation into deepening, into opening, and very possibly into that shift into the second half of life. Because I mean, obviously very different circumstances for me, but when I like was coming home from Rome and had my life falling apart, when I like couldn't meditate, I couldn't pray liturgy the hours I could, I came from community where we were praying for 4 hours a day and I could do none of it. I felt such guilt. I was like, what is this guilt? Is this shame? Like, why? I felt like I couldn't live up to these standards and I wasn't doing enough, even though I was physically incapable, just as young mothers who have children running around and are so maxed out at the end of the day. How could you possibly expect another thing from them? To me, there's like what needs to give in those situations. And obviously, you can't just be like, well, children, I'm going to go meditate for the rest of the day, fend for yourselves, you young 2-year-old. That's not an option. Like, again, holiness is found in the will of God for you. And motherhood, as crazy as it can feel sometimes, is one of those paths to holiness, is a vocation, is something that in saying yes to can lead to holiness as any other path would. And I think it is challenging, especially today with all of the social media and such. I mean, motherhood, I think, has always faced intense opinions, whether from, mother-in-laws or whoever, like, here's the right way you're supposed to do things. But when your ears are constantly filled with the opinions of folks on social media, where it's like, to breastfeed or not to breastfeed, and like, what are we supposed to do about, like, one of my sisters, like, likes to let her kid run around barefoot, and like someone was like, oh my gosh, like that is terrible for their formation. There's just so
Mm.
many intense opinions that to be able to sidestep some of those things and say, like, I'm going to do the best that I can. But I can't think of really a more intense way to be brought to face your own powerlessness than through parenting. And I can't speak as much for like fathers, but knowing,
No, it's real. I don't feel
yeah,
I'm not in charge of my life anymore.
like just um, it it can bring you to your knees, and there is a real vulnerability in that. And I think there's this kind of secret within spirituality that feeling like a hot mess is often like a really good place to be. And it
Mm.
feels terrible.
Mm.
It feels awful, but it is so much a part of the spiritual path that
There's a poverty in that, right?
Yeah.
exactly. Yep, the spiritual poverty of like I can't do this on my own.
Hmm.
I need help and
Yeah.
often divine help.
I think that also kind of extends to say the prescriptions that the church has, like say on moral teachings. Like I think that that can be very heavy for people at
Mm.
times too. And it's like, okay, we can see the logic and the beauty of say the moral teachings of the church, but how are we able to discern what's necessary in a particular moment? I think that really requires a real um, openness that, God works with anything that we do. I mean, there's nothing that escapes the very permissive will of God. I mean, everything is somehow caught up in that. And I feel like that's another area that's worth to be able to have an openness to be able to realize like no one's talking about changing anything. Like, well, I mean, I'm sure there's people who do talk about that, but I'm trying to say like we don't have to talk about that when we can say that, it's okay to be able to color outside the lines because there's something outside the lines that needs to be colored and it needs our attention in some type of way. So I feel like, the ability to be able to be graceful through that, which is difficult and riddled with both shame and guilt for
Mhm.
many people. Um, I think there needs to be some type of journeying with people on that, where it's not like super like, well, let's just kind of keep on working on it until you kind of get back in line with the church. Because I
Right.
don't know if that's really that should never be the like. I don't think that should be the goal. Like, I mean, because it's just too like I like when I'm in spiritual direction with a person, I'm like, I just want to know where God is present. What is God doing? I'm not like really trying to tell you where you need to go to get God. Like
Mhm.
what can you recognize what God is doing? I don't know if that speaks to you in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it draws me back to that image of the spiritual suburbia versus the wilderness. Like, we might have been plopped in the wilderness, but we're still kind of longing for the white picket fences and all the very strict rules of that HOA that we grew up with, where it was like we knew
Hmm.
exactly what we were supposed to do in order to be like in good standing in this community and an upright citizen and all the things. And sometimes those rules just like they don't apply when you're in the middle of the wilderness, and it feels so destabilizing, and I I feel like it's another image might be like you're flailing in the pool and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm drowning, like, and somebody just needs to be like, hey, you can just put your feet down, like there is a bottom right beneath, like it's okay, we're okay, like God is with you here, even though this looks very different than the image you were given in that spiritual suburbia, the very like kind of rigid and structured
Hmm.
um, form of religion that you were raised in.
And you're
It
worried about all
might.
these things. Who am I letting down right now? Is it me? Is it God? Is it my parents? Like what, am I growing out of my container or am I ditching my container? Like what's happening? All that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So it's a great invitation for inner work. And to be able to walk with somebody who has been through that is wildly helpful. Like, I don't know if I would have made it through that time if I didn't have a good spiritual director and a couple very close friends who, were sanity making for me, or at least were my tether to it, even if I wasn't sane myself.
Yeah.
You both just brought up spiritual direction, and I wanted to ask you about your practice of that, Kelly. And I wanted to frame it coming back to what you had said about how spiritual maturity needs to be paired with emotional and psychological maturity, or else it's not really going to they're going to be out of sync in some way.
Hmm.
Do you bring that to your spiritual direction, and if so, how?
Yes, I like to approach spiritual direction in a very holistic way. Like, nothing in life is excluded from spirituality because it's the wholeness of life.
Mm-hmm.
Holiness and wholeness are almost one and the same. Um, and so, I mean, wherever there are kind of those sticking points in life where you're like, gosh, I keep running into this, I think are important to be able to explore in spiritual direction and to be able to bring your body into spiritual direction. Like, what kind of sensations come up when, talking about XYZ, whether it's, your encounter with, your children, or a situation that happened at work and you've been avoiding having a really hard conversation. Like, all of those things are within the gambit of spiritual direction, along with those deeper things that we don't always have words for, the longings and the nameless somethings. John of the Cross calls it the I know not what. He just refrain after refrain, that I know not what. Like, yes,
Mm.
that, the I know not
Mm.
what. Those ineffable things are just as much the purview of spiritual direction as are the mundane, like, why can I not stop snapping at my children? Like, cool.
Mm.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I love using parts work or internal family systems in spiritual direction. It is such a wildly helpful way to just make sense of the mess of your interior life, where you just have, various parts of yourself that want different things but feel like they're clashing with one another. Like, the examples of a young mother might be like, hey, I have a part that really wants to be a good Catholic. I also have a part that like wants to be a really good mom. I also have a part that feels guilty for not doing X, Y. You have so many different voices that it can feel like a cacophony in your head. And so having a tool, someone once described it as having like a wide-toothed comb taken to her inner life, just like get through all the snarls and the tangles and kind of um, give everyone their part to play in the orchestra, if you will, if I can mix up
Yeah.
analogies. That to me is a really helpful way to be able to blend the psycho-emotional with the spiritual in a very natural way.
You're
Mm.
really
Yeah.
good at making it clear what the practicalities and the lived realities of mysticism and the interior, what's happening in interior life outwardly. You're really good at describing that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we're about to wrap up this time, and like this season is so much about listening, specifically listening without agenda. How do you practice that? Like, how do you enter into a listening space and
Mm,
not having an agenda, not being judgmental? What is your practice like for that?
yes. I think part of that took some training for me because it feels very natural for a lot of us when we are in a normal conversation. We might be swapping stories back and forth, and you share something, I'm like, oh, that reminded me of a time, or like, or we offer, what you might call quagestions, like you offer a suggestion kind of couched inside of a question, like, have you ever thought of, doing this? Instead of just really allowing a person to share, like holding this like sacred container, although sometimes, realistically, it's more like, a vomit bucket. You're just like,
Mhm.
throw out whatever you need to. Like, this is a safe space. If you need to rage, if you need to vent, this is totally fine. You can be as raw as you need to. Um, and so, taking a step back from trying to fix the other and just allowing space for however the sacred wants to show up and listening together for what that might be. I think once we recognize, especially that, spiritual direction or a spiritual conversation isn't meant for fixing, because second half of life doesn't really have much that needs to be fixed or solved. It's really just something to be attended to and received and allow things to unfold. That, to me, the more I can remind myself of that, is like, let's just get curious. Let's see how this unfolds, rather than thinking that they're coming to me for solutions.
It's great.
Well said. Thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
Would you like to tell us where our listeners can find Spiritual Wanderlust and anything else you want to plug?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can find, all of our programs and offerings at spiritualwanderlust.org. Or if you're specifically interested in our courses, you can just go to school.spiritualwanderlust.org. You can find all of those things that we mentioned earlier in the episode, from the modern mystic school to Celtic spirituality, our current night school. We also have an annual contemplative summit that's completely free, and we have like usually over 30 different speakers come over the course of 4 days. And it's usually a really fun event. We have like 10,000 people plus join us. So it's a big event, and
Is
that
that in
usually happens in the
Oregon?
fall.
Is that
What was
in
that?
Oregon? That happens.
That's all online.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Right.
yep. Contemplativesummit.com. You can go there and even just see, some of our past offerings there. So feel free
Great.
to check all those out and join us wherever you like. And oh, and if people want a free, like I have a free short little mini course on mysticism. If you go to, I think we put it at mysticismcourse.com, I think is where it's at. And you just get like 5 little mini videos on like what is mysticism, especially Christian mysticism, like what's the difference between contemplative and like meditative prayer, am I a mystic, etc.
Mm.
Some of the top asked questions about that.
The answer would
Cool.
be yes.
Yes. Yes.
We
Yeah,
all
and that's
are.
just a little freebie for anybody who wants.
This is great. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Kelly.
we'll be
What a
sure
joy
to
being with you.
and we'll be sure to
Yeah,
link all that in the show notes too. So,
perfect, thanks so much.
thank you, Kelly. Kelly Deutsch, so deep, so relatable and down to earth. I love that she's thinking about what's going to best prepare her for all these different aspects of life that perhaps some traditions don't necessarily think much about. They came up a little bit in our last episode on Shinto. The best resource, by the way, if you're curious to go deeper into second half of life spirituality, I have found is the book Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. I also love the idea that wholeness and holiness are one and the same. I think that's what we've been trying to say when we talk about living an integrated life throughout this whole podcast. All right, so next time we'll hear from Father Cyprian Concilio, our final guest, who is a priest and a Camaldoli monk and someone who does interreligious dialogue for a living based in Rome. He's our final guest, but it's not our final episode. There's going to be one more. We've got a special final episode for you. But tune in next time to hear Father Cyprian. It's a great conversation. Kind of wraps up the season. Religion to Reality is a podcast, but not just a podcast. It's also an interfaith monthly gathering. We'd love to have you join us for free online. You can find out more and register at our Substack, religiontoreality.substack.com. Religion to Reality was created and is executive produced by me, Dave Plisky, and is produced and edited by Nick Stropoli and Connor Donnelly. You can find the show notes and other resources at religiontoreality.org. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.